If you were born in medieval Europe, there's a high chance you wouldn't survive childhood. 1 in 3 children died before their 5th birthday. No antibiotics, no sanitation, no understanding of what killed you. Just fever, weakness, then absence. And if you did survive, you would wake up every day in a world where war, famine, and disease were never far away, where your place in society was decided at birth, where winters could starve entire villages, where the church bell that marked your baptism would one day mark your funeral. No one would be surprised if that day came soon. Forget the fantasy. Forget knights in shining armor and noble quests. This is what medieval Europe was really like. And if you had lived then, you would not have been a hero. You would have been human, trying to survive. In medieval Europe, freedom was not assumed. It was rare. If you were born a peasant, and most people were, your life was already decided before you took your first breath. You worked land owned by someone else. Land you could never own. Land you could never leave without permission. You paid taxes in crops, wheat, barley, whatever you managed to grow, even in years when the harvest barely fed your own family. You asked permission to marry, permission to move to another village, permission to inherit the few things your parents left behind. Your house was small, timber frame, wattle and daub walls, dirt floor that turned to mud when it rained. 1 room for an entire family, 1 fire for heat, cooking, and light. Smoke filled the room constantly because chimneys were rare. Your eyes burned, your lungs grew thick with it. Animals sometimes slept inside during winter, pigs, chickens, goats, because the warmth kept them alive, and their warmth helped keep you alive. Privacy did not exist. Everyone heard everything: birth, death, sickness, arguments. Life happened in 1 room, and hunger was familiar. You ate bread, porridge, pottage made from whatever vegetables you could grow. Meat was rare, reserved for feast days or when an animal was too old to work. Bad harvests happened often. Storms, drought, early frost. When they did, entire villages suffered. Grain stores ran empty by spring. People ate bark, roots, anything. Some didn't make it to summer, and winter did not forgive weakness. The cold crept into bones. Illness spread in cramped spaces. The old and the young died first, but the countryside was only part of the story. Because beyond the fields, rising from the landscape like stone giants, castles dominated the horizon, and they meant something very different than protection. Castles were not fairy tale homes. They were instruments of control. From inside a village, you could always see it. The Lord's fortress watching over you. It meant protection from invaders. That was true, but it also meant taxes, obligations, authority you could not refuse. If the Lord called for labor to repair walls, dig ditches, haul stone, you went. If he called for soldiers, you or your sons went, even if you had never held a weapon, even if harvest season had just begun. Inside the castle, life was harsh too. Stone walls trapped cold air year-round. Great halls echoed with drafts that no fire could fully kill. Floors were stone, beds were straw mattresses. Sanitation was basic at best. Garderobes that dropped waste into pits or moats below. The smell never left. And during sieges, castles became traps. Food ran low within weeks. Water grew contaminated from too many people, too little flow. Disease spread faster than arrows. People died inside their own walls. Not from battle, but from dysentery, typhus, starvation, and sieges were common. Because Europe was unstable, borders shifted with every marriage, every death, every broken treaty. Dynasties fought over land, titles, old grudges that no one could remember starting. Alliances collapsed overnight, and when war came, it did not politely announce itself. It arrived suddenly, with smoke on the horizon, with the sound of hooves, with fear that spread faster than any army. Medieval war was not cinematic. It was not slow-motion heroics or noble duels. It was loud, confusing, terrifying. Most soldiers were not elite knights trained from childhood. They were farmers handed spears and told to form a line. Men who had never killed. Men who had never seen violence beyond a tavern brawl. Now standing across from other men just like them, waiting for the order to advance. Battles were fought at arm's length, close enough to see the face of the person trying to kill you, close enough to smell their fear and your own. Mud slowed movement, armor weighed heavily, chainmail, helmets, shields. Your arms ached before the fighting even started. Arrows fell without warning. You didn't see them coming. One moment, the man beside you was standing. The next, he was on the ground screaming, and you kept moving forward, because stopping meant dying. Survival often came down to chance, which side of the formation you stood on, whether your shield held, whether you slipped, whether the man behind you panicked and ran, collapsing the line and dooming everyone in front of him. But the battlefield was only the beginning, because armies didn't just fight soldiers. They destroyed everything, burned crops before they could be harvested, stole livestock, horses, cattle, pigs, collapsed local economies in a single afternoon. Villages that took generations to build were erased in hours, and even if you avoided the fighting, even if the war passed your village by, disease followed armies everywhere. Camps bred illness, contaminated water, crowded conditions, open latrines. Soldiers carried sickness from town to town, and when they moved on, the sickness stayed behind. Which brings us to the real killer of medieval Europe. Not swords, not famine, disease. People did not understand germs. They did not know what caused illness, only that it spread and killed. Water sources were often contaminated. Wells too close to latrines, rivers used for drinking and waste disposal. Streets in growing cities filled with refuse, human waste, animal carcasses, rotting food. Rats thrived, fleas thrived, disease thrived. A small infection could become fatal, a cut while working the fields, a splinter that festered. Fever set in, delirium followed, and within days, you were dead. Childbirth was one of the most dangerous events in a woman's life. No sterile tools, no understanding of infection. Complications were common: bleeding, fever, exhaustion. Many women died, many infants died, and those who survived often faced it again within a year or two, because large families were necessary. Not for love, for survival, because so many children wouldn't make it. Infant mortality was staggering. Death was visible, frequent, expected. Families buried children. Parents died young. Entire households could be wiped out in a single season. Then, in the 14th century, something worse arrived. The Black Death. It moved faster than any army, faster than news could travel. Within a few years, entire towns vanished, streets emptied, fields lay abandoned. Some regions lost nearly half their population. Mass graves became common, pits filled with hundreds of bodies, covered with lime, sealed over. No names, no prayers, no time. No one knew why it was happening. Physicians bled patients, thinking bad humors caused it. Some blamed God's wrath. Others blamed outsiders, Jews, foreigners, travelers. Persecution followed fear. Communities fractured. Trust collapsed. Neighbors turned on neighbors. And yet, life did not stop. Survivors still planted crops, still married, still had children. Because medieval Europe was not only suffering, it was also transformation. And nowhere was that clearer than in the growing cities. Cities were growing: Paris, Venice, Florence, London. Trade expanded along rivers and coastlines. Guilds controlled crafts: blacksmiths, weavers, bakers, each with strict rules about who could work and how. Merchants accumulated wealth, not through land, but through goods: spices, wool, wine, salt. For some, cities meant opportunity. You could escape rural obligations. If you lived in a city for a year and a day, you were legally free, no longer bound to a lord's land. You could learn a trade, apprentice under a master, work your way up, slowly, painfully. But it was possible. You could rise, not to nobility, but to comfort, to stability, to a life where hunger wasn't constant. But cities were dangerous. Narrow streets barely wide enough for 2 cars. Wooden buildings packed tightly together. Upper floors jutting out, blocking sunlight from reaching the ground. Fire could destroy entire districts overnight. One spark, one overturned lantern, and everything burned. Sanitation was poor, waste thrown into streets. Gardez-vous, the warning shout before dumping a chamber pot out the window. Sewage mixed with rainwater, creating rivers of filth. Crime existed: pickpockets, thieves, violent disputes over debts or insults. Justice was swift and public: hangings, stocks, brandings. Crowds gathered to watch. Crowds spread illness quickly, especially in winter when people packed into taverns, workshops, churches, anywhere to escape the cold. Still, people kept coming. From villages, from farms, from lives that offered nothing. Because despite everything, despite the risk, the filth, the danger, cities were where change happened, and change brings power. But power in medieval Europe was never just economic, it was spiritual. Religion structured life. Church bells marked time. Not clocks, but bells. Matins, prime, vespers, compline. The rhythm of the day followed prayer. Holy days defined the calendar. Feast days, fast days, saints' days. More than 100 days each year when work stopped for worship. The church influenced law, education, politics. It crowned kings. It legitimized authority. It condemned heretics, burning them publicly as warnings. It offered hope in a world filled with uncertainty. Heaven was not abstract philosophy. It was escape. Escape from pain, from hunger, from fear. A promise that suffering had meaning, that enduring this life meant reward in the next. And people believed. Because what else was there? Cathedrals rose. Massive stone structures that took generations to complete. Laborers who laid the foundation never saw the finished spire, but they built anyway. Because faith was certainty in an uncertain world. But faith also justified violence. Crusades, holy wars to reclaim distant lands, persecutions of Jews, of Muslims, of anyone deemed outside the faith, punishments, torture, execution, public humiliation for heresy or sin. Religion unified Europe under one church, one God, one doctrine, and divided it between those who had the church's favor and those who didn't, between orthodoxy and heresy, between salvation and damnation, and beneath it all, beneath the suffering, the instability, the fear, a new world was forming. Despite hardship, despite plague, famine, and war, medieval Europe built universities: Bologna, Paris, Oxford, Cambridge, places where knowledge was preserved, where theology, law, medicine, philosophy were studied. Not by many, but by some, and those few shaped centuries to come. Legal systems developed: common law, canon law, codes that would influence nations. Trade routes expanded across continents: the Silk Road, Mediterranean shipping lanes, Hanseatic League. connecting Europe to Asia, Africa, the Middle East. Ideas traveled, technologies spread, paper, gunpowder, the compass. Cathedrals rose, structures that still dominate skylines today. Gothic arches, stained glass, flying buttresses, engineering marvels born from faith and ambition. It was not simply a dark age. That label is a myth. It was an age of endurance, of innovation often born from crisis. The people who lived through famine, war, and plague, who buried children and kept working, laid foundations for the modern era. Banking, law, universities, trade networks. The Renaissance didn't appear from nowhere. It grew from medieval soil. But the people who planted those seeds, they did not see themselves as historic figures. They saw themselves as survivors. Medieval Europe was not a fantasy. It was not endless misery either. It was unstable, unequal, unpredictable. A world where survival required endurance, not heroism. If you had lived then, you would not have been a knight. You would not have been a king. You would have been human, working land you didn't own, watching children die from illnesses you couldn't name, hoping the next winter didn't take everything, praying in churches you helped build but would never see finished, living under the shadow of castles that protected and imprisoned in equal measure. And in a world that gave no guarantees, survival was the greatest achievement of all. This was medieval Europe, not legend, not myth. Reality. Welcome to Epoch of Kings, where history meets the edge of the sword.